Hey guys, it's Kira. This is my second installment of the Author Spotlight. I decided to talk about Matt Haig. I have read quite a few of his books in the past. I have 5 different books of his to talk about today because there's some books that have just really stuck with me. I'm going to talk about the order in which I read them. This one, The Humans, I read a couple of years ago. I want to say about 3 years ago now, and this book has ultimately stuck with me. This is one of Matt Haig's earlier books, and basically it's kind of like a body snatchers type book. Matt Haig is an author that really focuses on the meaning of life, anxiety, depression, all those things. Those are themes that he heavily has dealt with in his life. And there's actually a couple nonfiction books in here also that kind of go with that theme. So I'll talk about those in just a second, but I do want to start with this one because actually all of his books but one book that I have in here was a 5-star book for me. So I did want to talk about him because I really love this author. He writes really hard-hitting books, but they have a very light element that kind of keeps them interesting and also doesn't really weigh you down. This one is about Cambridge professor Andrew Martin, and he is on the brink of discovering something that will pretty much change the way the human race does things. He's a mathematics professor, and he ends up getting invaded by an alien who is sent to invade him so that he will not realize this mathematical principle that will change things for humanity. His alien race does not want people to know what he's on the brink of discovering. In order for the greater good, he gets sent to kind of occupy Andrew Martin's body. This alien, this is a great book because this is called The Humans for a reason. This is about an alien who's learning how to be human and what it means to be human. And it really dives into the things that make humanity matter and make life matter as a human, which I this book was just so absolutely emotional, but it was brilliant and really amazing. See, this alien, he's very confused because he comes from a much more advanced race, and clothes confuse him, the way of life confuse him, and he finds out that Andrew Martin was not really a good person. He has a wife that he's kind of slowly become estranged by, and he has a son that, he's not very close with either, especially at the beginning of this book. But over time, he starts to realize what's important, and actually the wife that is a little bit estranged that he still lives with, Andrew Martin, he ends up kind of becoming a little bit closer to her, and things just kind of progress. I love the evolution of this story. This story just takes on kind of a life of its own because it really dives into humanity and what it means to be human. Now, Matt Haig does have a very unique writing style. It is kind of hard-hitting and very poetic in a lot of areas, but it's also really good at penetrating what it means to exist. I don't want to say too much without really going into spoilers, but this was definitely a 5 out of 5 stars for me. I love the premise for this book, and it does deal with the meaning of life and what makes life worth living. Now, the 2 nonfiction books that I want to talk about by Matt Haig. The first one I'm going to discuss is Reasons to Stay Alive by Matt Haig, and this is a nonfiction because this recounts his experience with depression. I've never read a book that was just so concise in the way it talked about depression. If you know somebody that's depressed, if you are depressed yourself, if you deal with episodes of depression where they're intermittent I do, if you struggle with finding meaning and understanding your depression, I feel this book, Reasons to Stay Alive by Matt Haig, is the perfect book to talk about when we talk about what it means to exist as somebody who has depression. This is almost kind of a little bit of a memoir too, because he does recount his personal experience with depression and what depression meant for him in his life and how his wife was kind of his rock during that depression. He really relied on her he was having trouble in his writing career, and she just stuck by him and it's such a beautiful him and his wife have this wonderful relationship. She was just the ideal supportive wife, and as far as I know, like, they're still married to this day, so I really love this. The blurb is by Mike Palin, and it says, brings a difficult and sensitive subject out of the darkness and into the light. I love, like I said, like, I cannot stress to you how much I absolutely love this book. So like one of the excerpts in here, like this is like so hard hitting. Now listen, if you ever believed a depressive wants to be happy, you are wrong. They cannot care less about the luxury of happiness. They just want to feel an absence of pain, to escape a mind on fire, where thoughts blaze and smoke like old possessions lost to arson, to be normal, or as normal is impossible, to be empty. And the only way I could be empty was to stop living. 1 minus 1 is 0. But actually, it wasn't easy. The weird thing about depression is that even though you might have more suicidal thoughts, the fear of death remains the same. The only difference is that the pain of life has rapidly increased. So when you hear about someone killing themselves, it's important to know that death wasn't any less scary for them. It wasn't a choice in the moral sense. To be moralistic about it is misunderstood. That's just like one excerpt from like this, but this is just, I really want to sit down and reread this because it's been a couple of years, but this was definitely a 5 out of 5 stars for me. Also, I'm mainly like highlighting him in this because like he does have a pattern, and you really get to embrace like that pattern after you've read his 2 nonfiction books, this one being the first one, and the second one is Notes on a Nervous Planet by Matt Haig. This one deals more with anxiety. And a lot of people who have depression also suffer from anxiety. Not everybody, but I'm also like one of those people like that tends to be more anxious than depressed. And I have to like kind of figure out how to maneuver it. This right here was a book that lent justification to the reasons for my anxiety. A lot of people say that people who are anxious have no reason to be anxious. They deal like with external forces like that kind of cause them to be anxious for no reason, because a lot of society views things like normalized things like that would not cause a normal person anxiety as not being factors in the reason why we get anxious. This book really kind of goes through and breaks stuff down, and I felt so justified after I read this for my anxiety that I just couldn't even tell you like that. I was just so happy like that I had a book in my life like this that really talked about and dove into what it meant to be anxious, and it justified that anxiety, and it made me feel like more comfortable in my own skin for being anxious, which is a really big feat like when you think about it, because like the average person with anxiety is usually gaslit into believing that they have no reason to be anxious when there are so many reasons that are outlined in this book for being anxious. And when broken down in the way that this book broke that down, I felt actually pretty good about my anxiety by the time I was done reading this, which is also a big feat. So this was another 5 out of 5 stars for me as a nonfiction. But yeah, so, and it basically says how we stay sane on a planet that makes us mad, how we stay human in a technological world, how we feel happy when we are encouraged to be anxious. Guys, if you guys know somebody who's really anxious, this is definitely a good book to get them, because I actually, like I said, I felt good about being anxious like after this. Like, not the fact like that I'm happy to be anxious, but the fact like that it made me feel more at home in my own skin. The next book I read, I have not had a chance to talk about. I read it in the month of October, and it's actually Matt Haig's newest release, and it's called The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and the tagline is "One Library and Infinite Lives." This actually follows our main character, Nora Seed, who's in her early to mid-30s. And she went to college and she is struggling to get by because she now has a ton of student loans. She picked a major like that, like really hasn't given her like a lot of career opportunities. And so she works in a bookstore, and it's like everything just went to hell like all in one day. So there is a trigger warning in here for suicide. So she finds her cat dead right after she got fired from her job at a bookstore that was helping to keep her afloat because she was already living paycheck to paycheck. Then she also like lives alone and she doesn't really talk to her brother. She finds out like that her brother had come to town like recently and didn't even come to say hi to her. So she's kind of like has an estranged brother also. So things like just feel really empty for her. So she decides to take her own life. She's kind of like lost all sense of purpose, like as like one thing for purpose is slowly chipped after another. One of her neighbors who she usually runs to get meds for now is having them delivered. So she doesn't even have that under her belt either. And she just is completely like just feels hopeless, like nothing is ever going to get better. So she ends up deciding to take her life. And she ends up like in kind of like this area like that is between life and death. She ends up in this library like where she finds all these books that kind of tell a story about an alternate life that she could have had she made one decision differently. This is like really like an exploration of who she could have been as a person and like what kind of like quality of life she could have had depending on which reality she entered into. I love the congruency of this book because what it really kind of talks about is that no matter where you are in life, it doesn't matter how successful you are. There was a pattern in here like where in multiple realities she found antidepressants in her purse. It didn't matter how successful she was or like how like on top of the world or where she was at in her life or who she knew or if she was married or if she had kids. I mean like this like went through like so many different scenarios of her most ideal life as far as like, you know, like, and then also like if she had picked a different major in college, like so many things. And it's like, it really encapsulates like that as long as there's life, there's hope. As long as, you know, like there's people like around you, like there's always something like, you know, like that you can find to hold on to. No matter how hopeless the situation and no matter how happy you think you're going to be on the other side of the fence, you could still end up on antidepressants. It doesn't matter like, you know, how happy you think you will be. That doesn't exterminate the fact like that people who have it seemingly really well can still end up sad. So I really like this approach and I loved this book so much. Like this was another one of my this is actually like one of my most favorite books of the year. And this was another 5 out of 5 stars because like it was amazing. So one of the things like that says in here, between life and death, there is a library, she said, and within that library, the shelves go on forever. Every book provides a chance to try another life you could have lived, to see how things would be different if you had made other choices. Would you have done anything differently if you had a chance to undo the regrets? And then this was a really beautiful excerpt too. It was a familiar feeling, this feeling of being incomplete in just about every sense. An unfinished jigsaw of a human, incomplete living and incomplete dying. So yes, I love this so much. Like I said, this is one of his most recent releases and I just absolutely loved it. There was a book that I actually read towards the beginning of November that this one was How to Stop Time. And I had seen mixed reviews regarding this one. This one I actually just finished at the beginning of November because I started like towards the end of October and I finished it. This was actually so far like my least favorite of the Matt Haig books. I'm still glad that I read it because like I still think it was a really good story. I ended up giving like this about a 3.5 stars in comparison like to the other like ones because it just didn't hit the same way that the other ones did. But this deals with a guy named Tom Hazard who has lived for hundreds of years. He has a condition, a medical condition that allows him to age a lot more slowly than the average human. Pretty much like for every year that that a normal human is alive, it takes him about 15 years on average to age like maybe 1 year if he's lucky. So he may look like he's really young, but he's been around for like a long time. So I kind of liked that approach also. He's actually a part of this secret society called the Albatrosses, and he got recruited to be like in this group like that with similar people. And the one rule in this, like the very first rule, is that you cannot fall in love. And so this deals like with the approach like that love is very important to living a long life, and life is pretty empty without love. I loved that approach. I loved how they kind of examined like that, because basically like this is told from two kind of time periods. This is told from when he first discovered like that he had this ability to age slowly, which was back like I believe in the late 1500s to early 1600s. His mother was actually blamed for the fact that he didn't age, and was tried and killed as a witch, because that was kind of like the thing at the time. So he ended up having to move away when he was still a kid, just to try to survive like in this world like where, you know, what he was considered was witchcraft. Now it alternated between like that and him trying to find his daughter here in present day. So he went to the Albatross Society, like, because they promised him that they would be able to locate his daughter for him, and he's still in present day and they have not found her. This book also deals like with the fact that he ends up finding somebody like that kind of like resonates with him after like, you know, hundreds of years of living, and he has to figure out like how to protect her, because anybody that finds out about them ends up getting murdered by the Albatross Society. So there's a big risk to this also. I overall really enjoyed this. It was kind of slow moving. It didn't have like the same kind of like hard hitting kind of things like to me like that the other ones like did, even though like I liked the concept overall of this. What I kind of struggled at like most with this, I believe, like the historical aspect like was okay, but like it didn't have like the self-reflection like that the modern age hymn did. And I actually preferred the modern age hymn to the historical hymn. Now the historical hymn was pretty interesting. Like he met like a lot of historical like famous figures and stuff like that, and that was really kind of a nice additive to it, but it didn't like quite hit right for me. Like it felt like a little bit short for me like overall like for that. So I ended up giving like this a 3.5 stars. Now the other books, wonderful. I love them completely. I'm still really glad that I read this. If you are a Matt Haig fan at all, like I would definitely like pick this up. If you are planning on reading his books, I would still pick this up. I still do recommend it, but I just don't think it's going to be for everyone. Alright guys, so that's my author spotlight. If you guys have any questions regarding like any of these books or anything else like that, please feel free to comment in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you guys like this video, hit the little like and subscribe, hit the little bell icon if you guys want to receive emails every single time I post. I'm also on Amazon, Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads. Those links are linked in the description below, and I will see you guys again very soon.